He could simply be hedging his bets emotionally, philosophically, and intellectually. Not wanting to produce something that later on he would hate, right? As that's really the risk with writing. When you're a fiery young author, you produce a bunch of stuff, and if something gets picked up and made popular, then God help you, because you're going to turn 45. You're going to look back at what you wrote when you were 25, and you're just going to be like, whoa. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Ben, vamos a tomar un café. Boy, howdy. I need it. Delicious. If I look a little fluffier than normal, it's because I recently turned 35 and my wife spoiled me by making an entire sheet of banana cake with cream cheese frosting and hazelnuts on top. Oh, man. Absolutely marvelous. Does wonders for your mood, I'm telling you. Your waistline, however. I'm welcome, bro. Yeah, right. Today is The Musical Brain by the Argentine author César Aira. El Cerebro Musical, published in 2015 and translated by Chris Andrews. The production of these short stories took place over the course of approximately 20 years or so. I think the earliest I saw was 93 and the latest 2011. Isn't that a fantastic cover? This beautiful edition was published by New Directions. I am partially sponsored by them in that they sometimes send me books for free. However, this was a very kind gift from my friend and patron James V. Thanks a lot, man. Really appreciate it. And thank you for your patience in me getting to it. If you'd like to purchase a book that's guaranteed a review, you can check out my Amazon wishlist below. And when I review the book, I will thank you by name. Though, yeah, I do ask for a considerable amount of patience, as I am absolutely steeped in books. But, the option is there should you like. And speaking of buying books, the executive producer of today's video, the sponsor of today's video, is Ageless Literature, rare booksellers based out of St. Pete, Florida. If you're interested in curated collectible books, please head over to agelessliterature.com. They've also partnered with a bindery that has a database of 5 million out-of-print books that they can have printed and bound in leather just for you, which is sick as hell if you ask me. That's an amazing service. They have a fine-looking website with a nice inventory of rare books, everything from a signed Hemingway to a signed Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Many cool books. So please help support small book dealer businesses and check them out via the link below. And don't forget to get 10% off your order with the code BetterThanFood. Thanks a bunch. Alright, first off, a bit about Aira. César Aira is one of Argentina's greatest living authors. I reviewed one of his many books, An Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter. Love it. It's one of my favorites, I think. He's in his mid-70s with a tremendous amount of work behind him. Or so it would seem. It's both true and not. I'll explain. The bio blurb near the back of this book. César Aira was born in Coronel Pringles, Argentina in 1949. He has published at least 80 books. According to Wikipedia, it's now over 100. The secret behind this enormous output for a fellow who, in his own words, writes every day, but slow and not so much, is that many of these stories, these books, are very short. Sometimes like only 20 pages approximately, or so. Thus, a lot of them were published by small presses. And it makes his output look very impressive. It's kind of mischievous, but it's pretty cool. I think he made fun of this, actually, when he wrote a short story included in this collection called Athena Magazine. It's about a couple of young guys starting a magazine who begin to condense their output, or plan to, as to include like an increasingly absurd number of magazine issues. I'm paraphrasing here, but Aira has said that he likes that each story is its own self-contained book. I too love this idea. I think that's really cool. He's also said that he discovered that the writers who write enormous sprawling works of genius, Thomas Mann or Tolstoy, are also capable of writing short works of genius. And I think this is true. With the books I've read in my life, a larger page count has never correlated with a stronger impact, ever. If anything, the opposite. It's probably more economically attractive for publishing houses to publish larger books, but this short book model is something I find very cool. Aira was inspired primarily by two literary figures. Jorge Luis Borges, fellow Argentinian, towering genius, of course, in the world of books. Incredible, one of the best, top 3 authors for me. And the strange violent poet, the Uruguayan Parisian expatriate, and author of the dark, experimental, poetic, legendary, outrageous Les Chants de Malborough, Comte de l'Autrement, which is the alias of the poet Isidore Ducasse, who died at just 24 and whom very little is known about. I reviewed Malborough in the past, poorly, and I vow to do a better job. So between these two inspirations exists César Aira's bizarre, tranquil, nightmarishly comical fiction. I feel like Kafka would finish the trinity, maybe Beckett, actually. Aira's work influenced many, including Roberto Bolaño. And I feel like you can totally see that in the work of Bolaño. Here's the thing about Aira. He's a chameleon, shape-shifting from book to book in genre and form. he's a really curious one. He's got quite a range, right? It's almost like he's like, I want to write this kind of novel this week. So he goes and tries it, whether it's like genre or otherwise. So what is A Musical Brain about? What isn't it about? It's a kind of curious multitude of banal, quotidian short stories, like everyday events or memories from childhood or happenings in his hometown, but laced with bizarre absurdity of varying levels, from the mildly unusual to the dream logic fantastical. There's a real range. 1 to 10 on the Aira scale. The Musical Brain, the eponymous story, is 10. 10 out of 10. I really have no idea what to make of him. That's the fun of reading Aira. The stories aren't connected thematically, but definitely tonally, right? There will be some details that clue you into the book's author, but honestly, if you open up one of his books, you have no idea what you're going to get. Could be historical fiction, could be a ghost story, could be a comedy, could be all the above. At his best, he's introspective, emotionally profound, and insightful with a charming, occasionally lightly self-deprecating, good-natured, dry humor. At worst, he's slow and boring. That's really about the worst that can be said about him. It's never bad writing. It's never unintelligent writing, to me at least. But it can be boring, yeah. It's surrealism, but it's subdued surrealism, deadpan surrealism, dry Dadaism, quixotically quiet, monotonous magical realism. I feel like he's smarter than me, and thus the humor or the cleverness found within these eccentric short stories is something that I just can't access. I felt the same way with Beckett. He's so subtle, his submarine has gone below my radar. There is a whimsicality, but it's such a small amount most of the time. I hesitate to even use the descriptor for fear that I'd give the wrong impression. It's not, right? It's very, like, it's like avant-garde jazz, like we'll talk about, which he discusses in the book. A certain artist. He's cool. César Aira is cool in a kind of nerdy way. I don't know what other word to use. Avant-garde jazz and comics and eccentric but mildly eccentric stuff. Not like outsider art. He's not like ultra challenging or anything. He's just, except in the way that he tells stories. I mean, which is like kind of fun. It's lighthearted. It's usually just kind of like light in tone and material, and kind of like even in the crazier moments. The titular story, The Musical Brain, is really the one that goes furthest into this realm, involving an enormous, actual, magical musical brain, a torrid love triangle drama between 3 circus dwarves, 2 twin brothers, and the woman they're in love with. Becomes this big scandal, jealousy, and this big drama unfolds. And an enormous flying insect humanoid monster, like out of some strange 1950s horror film acid trip. That's the most over-the-top one, right? There's quite a range. One is simply about a guy on a bus that's being chased by a dog. Like, the bus won't lose the dog keeps barking, and the guy realizes that the dog is coming after him. That's actually a fairly horrifying yet simultaneously comedic story. A similar one, everydayness taking on this nightmarish, demented quality, would be The Cart, which I think is honestly my favorite of the bunch. Reminds me a little bit of The Blanket by Charles Bukowski, which is a genius short story in Tales of Ordinary Madness, about a guy, an alcoholic who realizes that his blanket is trying to kill him. Anyways, The Cart is just like, it's like a perfectly bizarre joke. Really quite funny. It's very simple. I think I laughed out loud pretty hard. Another curious thing, The Oven Bird, the short story in the book, The Oven Bird, deals with the exact topic that has been recently circulating around on YouTube, put forth this time by Robert Sapolsky, as it's an old idea, all about the idea of free will and us not actually having any free will. So it takes the short story takes the perspective of a bird in Argentina, I assume, that's watching humans, and it's from the bird's perspective. And like humans watch birds thinking, you can hear them right now, thinking, oh, they're so natural, they don't think about anything at all, and they're just perfectly created to do these sorts of things. The oven bird. The bird in the story is watching these humans have mate or something on their balcony or something, or on their porch, thinking, they're so perfectly graceful or whatever. Just look at them. They're just made to do this. How do they know when to have the mate? You know, as if we would say, how does a bird know when to fly this way or that? And, you know, anyway, lightly amusing, right? He shivered as he watched them brewing the mate, passing the gourd around, The whole complicated ceremony, involving the use of implements and accompanied by words, gestures, movements. Human instincts were so amazing. By instinct, they were able to perform this intricate ballet, and so many others. He was always seeing them do something new. Without hesitation or stopping to think, without wondering if it was just the right thing to do or not, without deliberation, just because that's how it was written in the immemorial archives of their happy species. While he, ovenbirds, he thought, had paid for the skills that allowed them to survive with a drastic weakening of the instinctive system. It was futile and perhaps ungrateful to complain, but he felt that the price was too high. That's what the example of the humans was telling him. Humans lived, and they knew in advance how to do it. The ovenbird was subject to the terrifying arbitrariness of ideas and thoughts and states of mind, of will and its endless weaknesses, of climate and history. Quite the role reversal. It's clever. Another story is about him sitting in a cafe at a museum, at a Picasso museum, and this milk bottle releases a genie that asks him, would you like to have a Picasso or be Picasso? So Aira has to consider this very carefully. I tried to put my ideas in order. I silently repeated the genie's words. To have a Picasso or to be Picasso? Who wouldn't want to have a Picasso? Who would turn down a gift like that? But on the other hand, who wouldn't want to have been Picasso? Was there a more enviable fate in modern history? Not even the privileges of supreme worldly power are comparable to what he had, because they can be removed by political events or wars, while the power of Picasso, transcending that of any president or king, was invulnerable. Anyone else in my place would have preferred the second option, which included the first, not only because Picasso could paint all the Picassos he liked, but also because it's well known that he kept a lot of his own paintings, including some of the best. The museum I just visited had been set up with his personal collection, and in his later years he even bought back works that he'd sold as a young man. Stuff like this. My favorites in the collection were Picasso, the dog, the cart, the ovenbird, and Cecil Taylor. The short story Poverty is one man's reflection on being poor for his entire life, and the short story becomes magically, realistically humorous when poverty is actually externalized as this woman who is acting as though Aira has been completely ungrateful for all the wonderful things poverty has given him, intellectually or artistically, I believe, as in developing his character. And she comes in and rages at him and then is like storming out the door, and he's begging her not to go. He's like, please don't leave me, poverty, so. Yeah, it's cute, right? It's like, all right. The all that plows through the nothing, wherein the narrator actually sees a ghost, but it's kind of anticlimactic because he sees the ghost from behind, because the ghost is wandering outside of the house and doesn't think anybody's going to see him, but Aira happens to be in town, wandering, just taking a walk, and it's humorous. Humans have seen a great many things in the course of their long history. It might be said that, collectively, they have seen it all. I thought I'd seen it all myself, even with my limited experience. The individual repeats the alls and the nothings of the species, but there is always something that is extra or missing. Only the unrepeatable is truly alive. That unrepeatable something is a single unique entity in which the worlds of life and death come together like the points of an inconceivable double vertex. And nobody, until today, had seen the back of a ghost. They're very awkward and silly, yet cerebral and kind of deep, but not really. The nostalgia of childhood is a running theme in the book, usually his own. And there's just the slightest tone of melancholy about the passing of time present in his stories. He likes films. Aira has an appreciation for films, and he describes them in the beginning story, A Brick Wall, which is about him journeying back to his hometown. I think he's talking about the theater in town, and he's talking about these films that he's seen throughout his life and how they're in his head like ghost stories, right? And I love that idea. I love the idea of being haunted by films, right? The idea that the films you've seen are like ghost stories in your memory. The work of Aira is quiet, right? But he never like goes too high or too low. All these stories are childish in a narrative way, right? Like stories you would tell the kids. Aira's a guy who likes the narrative quality of fairy tales, as he said. Or like Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights, once upon a time, telling a story. Something that all of us right to the very beginning of our childhoods are familiar with, or hopefully are familiar with. That would be a true crime to do to a kid to never tell them a story in that manner. Once upon a time. Can you imagine? Sadly, I'm sure there are tons of kids out there who actually are probably... That's depressing. There are probably more kids out there right now who are not being told, once upon a time by mom and dad, but are rather like given a iPad or whatever to read on or play a game with or whatever. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't really like the modern world. I don't. If you've got kids out there, you should really be telling them stories. Just saying. You really should. Ideally, you should be just making them up, like right as you go. Which I think is basically what Cesar Aira is doing. Like, he's just sort of like, that's kind of probably how he writes. Just like, once upon a time, this shopping cart came alive. It's like, okay, and then, it's there is a little bit of a quality of improv to Aira, right? Yeah, like you're telling a story to a kid, and then you like make some crazy shit up, right? Like, hey kid, listen to this wild stuff, right? It's like, and that's sort of like what he's doing to us. He's like, hey people, once upon a time there was a dog chasing a bus, and I realized the dog was after me. And no matter how far we went down the street, how many corners we turned, I couldn't lose it. And the dog kept barking. It kept coming after me. And it kept gaining on me. And it's like, that's what the story is about. That's a great, really nice demonstration of raising the tension, especially when the guy realizes that he recognizes the dog. And you don't need to know everything about it, which you don't in the book, but it's yeah, maybe within modern writing, given everything that's postmodernism, everything that's come before us, poetry, experimental writing, maybe we have kind of just forgotten the very, very simple act of storytelling. And I don't mean in like the 3-act structure, fucking screenplay style, whatever. And I just mean like more almost like in the myth like style, in the Brothers Grimm fairy tale style, right? I mean that's more of what Aira is kind of like those are kind of the origins, I think, of Aira's fiction more than anything else. Yeah, so there you go. One reviewer called him a children's writer for adults, which I think is a perfectly accurate description. Of course, kids would probably be bored out of their skull if you read them Aira, but then again, maybe not. Maybe the structure would be quite familiar, You know what the strangest thing is? When you think of the word storytelling, this is immediately the classic style that comes to mind, the place where we all started. Yet almost no authors operate in this manner anymore. It's weird, isn't it? It's like he almost had to go through everything else to kind of like come back to the beginning. Aira, the character and the author, never takes anything too seriously. Neither in the stories he stars in or in real life, it seems. There always seems to be kind of a calculated, cold distance, or a manner, or an aura, Aira's aura, of just being cool. But ultimately, in my opinion, the work suffers from this impression it gives of self-sabotage, holding itself back, being timid, too tentative or uninspired to take itself seriously, or attempt anything with real gravity or consequence. Therefore, there's no real risk, and thus, no real reward. The stakes are always quite low, which is a shame, because he's a tremendously talented author. Thus, the collection became too banal, too cute, too Haruki Murakami, too Jarmusch, new Jarmusch, bad Jarmusch. While it sometimes goes deeper, even then it just has this kind of surface quality, like a cursory intellectual consideration as opposed to a deeply felt truth or conviction, or even the attempt at one, because, God knows if any of us actually get to anything definitive. We probably don't. I mean, perhaps that's the point, because, he doesn't trust philosophers. He thinks they're a bunch of charlatans, as he said, and most of the time he's probably right, but so are authors. All of them. All of them. So what do you do with that? I wasn't prepared for that. I don't know. I don't know what you do with that. They are. That's actually true. So all authors are storytellers, which is to say they're liars. Philosophers too, undoubtedly. Everybody's just throwing shit against the wall. Nobody really knows anything, right? Like, those aren't my words, and that's ancient wisdom. Nobody really knows anything. Nobody knows what the fuck this is. So in that case, my criticism stands. I mean, like, if we're all full of shit, why not go for it? You know what I mean? So in that respect, the book fails, for me. He could simply be hedging his bets emotionally, philosophically, and intellectually. You know, not wanting to produce something that later on he would hate, right? As that's really the risk with writing. When you're a fiery young author, you produce a bunch of stuff, and if something gets picked up and made popular, then God help you, because you're going to turn 45, you're going to look back at what you wrote when you were 25, and you're just going to be like, whoa. I couldn't blame him, and his style that he's cultivated is still very interesting to me. I'm definitely going to read more of him, you know, because I think, but I don't think that this is one of the best he's done. No. He doesn't take himself very seriously, you know. But then, that's an honest approach to writing as well. Just not my current interest. Obviously, the collection of stories weren't necessarily meant to be presented together, right? They were chosen for this collection, you know, and these are stories that were written over the course of 20 years. So there wasn't necessarily the intention when he began writing these short stories that they were going to be part of a collection. But it just had this ethereal quality, right? Like being served skimpy portions of supposedly delicious food, but with brief, weakened flavors, diluted flavors, when I was expecting a satisfying course of dishes, you know, something substantial from an otherwise great chef. Yeah, it was like going to a 3-star Michelin restaurant you've known and loved, raved about even, and having a ho-hum meal. It was, you know, not terrible, but like disappointing. Not nearly enough to cause you to lose interest in the chef, but it just seemed like an off day, right? But with hints, you know, hints at what they're capable of. There were some high points in the meal, but I'm just like, yeah, I mean, I've got like Nietzsche on the shelf, right? Like, I got stuff to read. I want to champion Aira, as I loved Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter. But unfortunately, most of this was a slog with just forgettable narratives. I hate to say it, but my eyes glazed over with many of the stories in this collection. The Murakami-style magical realism randomness, delivered in a style of the casual, banal, everyday happenstances, quickly became dull. The stories with the systems of the guys with the indie magazine and the kids playing the game with the outrageously large numbers were ultimately just kind of a bore. It was like, all right, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but you're getting something out of this that I'm not. At its worst, it got to the point where it was like reading the inside of a man's brain after he had just taken a marijuana edible, ruminating on subjects continually, in a calm and collected fashion, complete with specific details and thoughts that, while mildly curious, make you wonder why anybody would write about them. Aira, like, in his stories, in his tone of writing and in person, always has the quality of someone who is like this close to falling asleep, you know? It's weird. It's as if the narrator were to have seen something extraordinary, which in some cases in the book, this occurs. They see the narrator sees something extraordinary. And he comes to tell you, to inform you exactly what it was in minute detail, but after running hill sprints for an hour, or having done 45 minutes at high speed on the stair climber, right? Or having gotten only 3 hours of sleep. So he's utterly exhausted in relating the tale. The content is no less extraordinary, technically, but the intensity of enthusiasm is diminished. The delivery system is lackluster. Something is squashed. Something's like subdued, right? Yeah, it's like brought down. I don't know what the word is. But then they all have that dreamlike quality too. So it's sort of like always being on the edge of a dream. 1 foot in reality, 1 foot out. That's probably not the worst description of magical realism in general. But it does seem to suit Aira's writing style. He's like the exact opposite of Jack Kerouac. You look at like On the Road, it's like the polar 180 opposite, right? Interesting that there's the jazz connection, right? I mean, like, so bebop here and then like avant-garde over here, but yeah. My favorites in the collection were A Brick Wall, The Cart, The Dog, Poverty, and Cecil Taylor. Cecil Taylor, which is the last in the collection, nearly turned my my whole opinion of the book around. It was close. I thought it was excellent. I'd never heard Cecil Taylor before. This is a real person, a real musician. Though I've been a fan of jazz for years. Cecil Taylor was an avant-garde jazz pianist from the 50s in New York, and is amazing. I mean, amazing. I find him most emotionally receptive to music in the morning. And I put on the track by Cecil right after reading about him in the Aira story. I didn't even finish the story before listening because I like the accompaniment of atmosphere when an author mentions a musician or film. I like to see and hear what they are, right? And I was just completely blown away by this guy. I mean, really. In any descriptive attempt, it seems as though one would have to employ the term challenging, as he's an avant-garde jazz musician. But I was like dancing around the kitchen. I was like, holy shit, this sounds like the inside of my head in a good mood, right? It was amazing. It was just bizarre when you listen to the notes that don't go together technically, but they do in your head. Like they like you could see like, oh yeah, that kind of works. You feel it rather, you know? It was just like, I don't think I'd reacted that strongly to a piece of music like without thinking about it, just feeling it in a way that where I was just like, holy shit, this is different. And great. Really, really good. Really playful and kind of like just many, many things going on at the same time, like kind of like not sarcastic, but kind of like mischievous. Yeah, like kind of like, but also dynamic and oddly natural while being experimental. Like it kind of makes sense in a really messed up way. Like, of course, like, oh, you could see the short story about this poor pianist living on the Lower East Side in the 50s, I think, in New York City, who just can't seem to get any appreciation at the, you know, at any venue he plays in, even though he keeps getting hired for gigs, is great. Quiet, melancholically funny, the classic tale of the underappreciated artistic genius. Let us examine a particular case to refine the demonstration. For example, one of the great musicians of our time, whose existence is unquestionable, Cecil Taylor. Born into jazz, he remained faithful to its outward forms, the clubs and bars and festivals at which he performed, the instrumental groups he put together, even the odd, vague, or inexplicable declaration of an influence, Lenny Tristano, Dave Brubeck. But his originality transcended musical categories. His thing was jazz, but any other kind of music too, broken down into its individual atoms and reassembled, like one of those celibate machines that produced the dreams and nightmares of the 20th century. According to the legend, Cecil made the first atonal jazz recording in 1956, 2 weeks before Sun Ra independently arrived at the same result, or was it the other way around? They didn't know each other, nor did they know Ornette Coleman, who was doing similar work on the other side of the country, which goes to show that beyond the genius or inspiration of those three individuals, and Albert Ayler and Eric Dolphy and who knows how many others, causation was operating at some higher level. That level is history, and history has an important role to play, because it allows us to interrupt the infinite series that are generated by the art of thinking. This is how interruption loses its false prestige and its insufferable preponderance. It becomes frivolous, redundant, and trivial, like a muffled cough at a funeral. But its very insignificance gives birth to necessity, which makes the rule of history manifest. Interruption is necessary, though it may be a momentary necessity, and the moment itself is necessary too, and often sufficient, which is why we say that a moment is all it takes. I think the anecdotes from Cecil's life, if they're true, work well for a short story. As Aira says in the story, you know, biographies are literature. In the end, biographies are literature, and what counts in literature is detail, atmosphere, and the right balance between the two. I love that. There is something in Cecil Taylor's music that rhymes with the writings of Cesar Aira. Listen to that first track, Air, off The World of Cecil Taylor. You'll see what I mean. What seems at first like a playful, almost childish goofball experiment swiftly turns into a demonstration of total genius and mastery of the art form. The exact same could be a description of many of Aira's stories. They don't always work, in my opinion, for me. But the crafted atmosphere is so delicate, I wonder if it's not just like the state of mind I'm in, right? Whether or not I got enough sleep or whether or not I'm feeling patient or impatient. But for the record, 1,000 Drops is where he lost me. The story 1,000 Drops. It was just like a joke that went on far too long, you know? It's about the 1,000 drops of paint that composed the Mona Lisa suddenly falling apart and deciding to go off in different directions all over the world, detaching from one another and shooting off on their own narrative destinies. And he tells the story of the drops, several of the drops. This collection, I have no idea what to do with it. I feel as though I read it too late. It seems like a collection for initiates into magical realism, in a way, for those unfamiliar to it. Is it better than Food? No, not for me, unfortunately. It was close, but Not quite. Maybe only because there's another book by Aira that I like more. So I had, I kind of have this standard, this watermark, right? But that last story is a keeper, as are a couple others, I think. I don't like being critical of a book sent to me by fans, but I also don't want to just lie because it was a gift, So I find myself in this difficult position. It's a tough position, but I hope you'll understand, James. Thanks again for the book. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who have donated $5 or more per video to the show. I place their names in this mason jar, and for every review, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out is sent a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. It's currently from Nicaragua, although I'm running out. I'm wondering where to go next. Possibly Brazil? Maybe Costa Rica? We shall see. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much. You can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/books are better than food. The tiers start at $5 or more per video. I usually post about 3 to 4 videos a month, but you can set a monthly limit so you don't go over budget. And as long as you're donating for at least one video per month, you'll get access to all the content. You won't just be restricted after one video, you'll get access to all the posts. So, cool. And all international shipping is included. Cool. All right. Thank you very much to all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Pájaros. Alex R. Thank you very much, Alex. Really appreciate it. You're going to be sent The Musical Brain, El Cerebro Musical, by César Aira, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Cheers. If you want to support the show, you can buy the book from the Amazon link below. Tengo el link para el libro en español también, abajo. Gracias. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We're getting dangerously close to 200,000 subscribers, and that would be a nice milestone to reach pretty soon. So, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And please hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and always remember, bring a book wherever you go. All right. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. Talk to you soon. Ciao.